just stop trying. Maybe you become apathetic, like, oh God, we're all the same anyway, right? There's so much contradictory information out there. Who even knows what's going on anymore? Who even knows what's real? In the worst cases, people become anxious, depressed, maybe more easily manipulated. Or maybe you start taking shortcuts with the political information you do consume. Instead of actually listening to what politicians are saying, you just pay attention to the vibes. Politics becomes something a bit more like sports or fandom. Like, have you seen that one TikTok of Tim Walz in a runza? Man, I love that guy. Couldn't name a single one of his policies. I don't actually even know what a runza is. But anyway, he seems like a real sweetheart. The other response to information overload is selective exposure. That's where you limit yourself to only consuming information that already fits your narrow worldview. We could call that filter bubbles or maybe echo chambers. In the 1990s, they called it cyber balkanization, which I think sounds a lot cooler, personally. We should have stuck with that. This response is really good for platforms themselves. If everybody's sorted into their nice little algorithmic niche, that makes it easier to hit us with targeted ads. And we love it. Posting nice, simple content that aligns with your niche gets you that sweet, sweet clout in the form of likes and shares. I mean, what do you get by posting challenging, nuanced content? I guess I wouldn't know. Selective exposure might contribute to political polarization and maybe an increase in authoritarian thinking, as people come to believe that discussion is impossible because everyone's living in wildly different versions of reality. Although I should stress that from the research I've read, that remains an unproven theory. It's a thing some people worry might be happening. Unfortunately, both of these effects can be gamed by bad actors. Social media can be used to spread propaganda at speed and scale, especially now, thanks to AI. Part of the problem is fake news, but only part. Another tactic might be deliberately flooding the information space with a lot of contradictory information to push people into learned helplessness and selective exposure. For example, in 2017, a bunch of documents leaked from a government office in China, showing that the Chinese government regularly employs people to post on Chinese social media. By analysing the wording of the posts, researchers were able to estimate that the government writes approximately 448 million posts every year, which, wow! I mean, if you work for the Chinese government, leave a comment? Most of the posts were positive, and they almost never lied about anything. They usually spiked on national holidays or just after big events like riots and terrorist attacks. Anytime people might feel the need to get in the streets and protest, government posters would write about positive things that the government was doing, or maybe just factual things like there is an upcoming conference. The researchers hypothesized that the goal was to distract people and dilute negative sentiment, still playing on learned helplessness and selective exposure, but just through positivity. And that might seem very scary, like, oh my God, if you thought fake news was bad, it's only the tip of the iceberg. But there might actually be some cause for optimism here. Fake news is one possible part of illicit influence campaigns. That's why bad actors use social media to try and modify people's behavior. Illicit influence campaigns need assets, things like websites, fake social media profiles, tame influencers. They also need things like money and time and coordination, and those things are easier to go after than just lies. People are always going to post bullshit on the internet, and there's not really a whole lot that we can do about that, but we can target illicit influence campaigns at the source. Here's an example from very recent news. Conservative influencers Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, Lauren Southern, and Benny Johnson have all worked for the American production company Tenet Media. In a recent US federal indictment, Tenet's founders are accused of taking almost $10 million from the Russian government to create content that polarizes the American public and potentially subverts their election, deliberately pushing people into learned helplessness and selective exposure. Allegedly, the influencers themselves didn't even know their paychecks were coming from Putin. So here we have a real-life example of an illicit influence campaign. And fake news isn't the heart of the problem. Tim Pool and the rest post a lot of crap, but fact-checking them isn't going to make them stop, because they're paid not to care. And their audience probably aren't going to stop watching and sharing that kind of content either, because they've selective exposured themselves into an online community that fulfills some psychological need for them, whether the information they're sharing is true or not. Like, it's social media, emphasis on the social. So probably better to tackle the campaign at its source, which is what the US government is trying to do. Fake news is not the heart of the problem here. And hey, that was our first myth, so we can go and cross it off the board. Man, it feels really good to bust. Myths. And now on to our second. TikTok teens will save the world. Now, social media can effect some changes in society. Me Too started as a hashtag, and as a professional actor, I can tell you it has had some effects on the industry. It's a lot more common now to have an intimacy coordinator on set when shooting a sex scene, for instance, and that's good, you know, that's not nothing. Black Lives Matter started as a hashtag, and now it's an international movement in control of several $1 million worth of donations. It is possible to grow a movement online and also to fundraise from a wider group of people than you could in ye old days. Unfortunately, that also means that movements can quickly grow beyond their capacity to organize, which leads them to fizzle out or splinter. The more a movement is social media based, the less it has to answer tough questions about leadership and responsibility and delegation, things that bind a movement together for the long run. An example might be Occupy Wall Street, which got a lot of people moving and in the streets, but didn't really stick the landing. It's easier than ever to join a social movement, but it's also easier than ever to drop out of one. And that in turn also means that it's easier for governments to just ignore large protest movements if they have a large social media component to them. I mean, yeah, you might get 250,000 people in the streets every Saturday, but as long as most of them are taking pictures of their funny signs and posting them online, they're not organising direct action. And if they are, you can always just arrest them. So, did we bust? I feel like we busted. Why don't we call this one a partial bust? And that leaves us with our third myth. Social media holds politicians accountable. Now, in the early 2010s, it was fashionable for people to say that Twitter might bring down authoritarian regimes, especially after Egyptian dictator Hosni Mubarak was ousted in the so-called Arab Spring. It was a series of popular revolts that happened in many countries that had a large social media component to it. Although these days, the idea that Twitter might be good for democracy is almost a little quaint. The new Egyptian leader was quickly replaced by a military dictatorship. China uses social media to control its population, as we saw, and Western elections are definitely vulnerable to illicit influence campaigns. You can use social media to do public humiliation. Oh, absolutely. No problemo. It's really, really good at that. You can bully politicians all day long. You can humiliate a billionaire so badly, he tanks his own businesses and gets clowned on by his own daughter. But that's not necessarily the same thing as accountability. In his book, The Unaccountability Machine, journalist Dan Davies says that accountability isn't actually a person-to-person thing at all. It's a function of the way organizations process information. As organizations become more complex, they develop ways of limiting the amount of information that flows through them, just to stop them from becoming overwhelmed by it. And that can result in outputs that no individual actually decided on because the relevant information never crossed anybody's desk. And so there might genuinely be nobody to hold accountable. An example could be Boeing. Nobody at Boeing decided to make shit planes. They wanted to cut costs, so they outsourced key jobs and they ignored whistleblowers, i.e., they dismantled the systems that feed back information to the top. The result is a system that makes shit planes, even though no individual actually decided to do that. So if Davies is